Yo, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy, Motorman Dan, and today I am going to go over the Orcs Must Die lore as I understand it. Okay, um, this is a little different than what the wiki suggests. The guy who wrote it suggested that Unchained happened between 2 and 3. I'm gonna suggest it happened before 1. So you have the comic, which summarizes Unchained, leads you up into 1. We're gonna look at the comic. Unchained happens before 1, then 2, then 3. So it doesn't actually happen between them, and we're going to go over why I think that is and how Vorwick actually plays a role in sort of that transitional period between Unchained and 3, and how Cygnus also kind of plays a role. We're going to take a look at a lot of that stuff. The first thing I want to mention are the 3 main characters that we have to talk about. It's Gabriella, Cygnus, and Vorwik. Max is kind of a filler. But I do want to touch on Egan a little bit. Egan is said to have natural magical powers. And Kelsey is a studious mage. So you have magic that is natural to people and magic that is understood by people. Cygnus and Vorwik are the same way. So Cygnus was studious and Vorwik was magical in nature. So, you know, does that mean that Egan can turn evil or Kelsey can turn evil? They might go the different ways like Cygnus and Vorwik. Who knows? But yeah, I mean the same thing happened with Max and Gabriella, right? Although they didn't really, Gabriella was before Max, and so it's a little bit of a different dynamic with those two. But we'll talk about that as well a little bit. Yeah, so Max is kind of a token character, just kind of a placeholder. But we're gonna look at the possibility of him maybe being more than what we actually think. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the comic. Now, this comic has been passed around a little bit around the community. It is official, and it came out in lieu of Orcs Must Die 1 coming out. So this was kind of the backstory that they were going to go with whenever they released Orcs Must Die 1. In the comic, they explain what a rift is, so that it summons rain when there's a drought, or it can be, the magic can be used to do that. Or it can, like, thaw frozen crops and stuff like that, So ideally, they would pick a planet that could survive without the rifts, and then because the rifts can be closed from either side. So if you have rifts closing from the other side, instead of being left open, then you need to still be able to sustain life on your planet. So ideally, they're just, using the magic from the rifts to make life more automated, or just better in general, and more prosperous in general, but not necessary is what I think. We'll talk about that when we talk about the order in a little bit. But some adventurers went over and they found orcs, and orcs found the rifts, and then orcs started attacking the rifts, and then defenders here held on, and you had weavers as well, which were some kind of, I think in the games they ended up like leveling you up, I guess. I didn't really play 1 and 2 a whole lot, but they're called weavers, like your level up options. So yeah, anyways, and then you had the guardians, the archers and knights and stuff, and they helped defend. And so the order, which is this overbearing governmental agency, if you will, or maybe like a secret service. They sent some, or they could be a governmental contractor, but they sent mages over to the orc world, or into a in-between world to defend the rift. And then fortresses were crafted from mages as well. So the order mages were able to craft these fortresses using magic, as we're going to see later on. Cygnus is able to do that later on as well. And those are used to defend the rifts. So the process was painstaking but crucial. The order went to great lengths to safeguard our world. There's a reason for that, and a reason why they wouldn't just close the rifts instead. Okay, and then it talks about Cygnus and him training Max, and Max being a goofball. Other mages, or the war mages, and probably veteran war mages, were fighting, and this includes and well, apprentices that hone their abilities and such. Yeah. And then it talks about war mages step through their rifts only to meet their doom, trampled into the soil under thousands of filthy clawed feet. Now, we don't have in Orcs Must Die 1 or 2 any mention of lots of other people, right? Of other war mages and such. Other than in 1, Cygnus does recommend, or I guess suggest, that there are other war mages still. He doesn't mention who they are, and he doesn't mention anything about them other than Max is one of them. And he'd be surprised if Max was the only one standing left to take over. But I think this kind of shows us, you got all these different war mages in the art that depict like different abilities and everything. And so I think this kind of shows us, and non-human, you have elves as well, and maybe a dwarf, I guess. But you have other characters here that I think would represent Unchained. And we know that some of them died. I think, Temper, he was one of the Unchained heroes. I think he may have died. The Order kind of did him dirty by keeping him in a psych ward longer than he needed to be, and that caused his anger issues to escalate instead of de-escalate, and so they made the situation worse. And I think they did that on purpose, as they kind of came under fire from concerned citizens as well that was happening. So then they sent him to fight for the Order, and he probably ended up dying from that. And then people like Tundra went home after this and all that. So anyways, because he only had a contractual agreement to defend the rift of his rift, which was like up in the north, in the icy territory and stuff. So yeah, so this is the beginning of 1, is at the end of the comic, and Cygnus is saying that he is Cygnus and Max are going to have to hold on to everything, and he's not going to hold his breath for that. Okay. Now let's get into the next piece of lore that we have, which actually happens at some point before, like in the early stages. And this is probably before even Cygnus trains Max, probably before Max's time. To be honest, it's probably back here in the very beginning stages, or I don't know, just an earlier time. There's really no time frame for the comics to take place. It could have taken place over thousands of years or over hundreds of years. We just don't know. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is Gabriella talking about, or we're going to look at Vorwick and Cygnus kind of having their dialogue here.
Here we are once again, friend Vorwick, fighting the largest orc armies ever assembled.
I welcome it, friend Cygnus. I am curious about what drives the orcs. You must admit, they are far more willing to die for their cause than our own order.
So you can already tell that Vorwick has a disdain for the Order, and rightfully so. For whatever reason, the orcs are attacking, and they don't know why, but Vorwick sees their grit and their potential to be a massive force of power, and the Order just isn't that. The Order, they would it's kind of like the whole like general and soldier thing, right? Like people would say like the general is the worst part of the army because they just sit back behind, they're in their tent, and they don't actually go out and fight for anything. And they don't risk their lives. So, why should they be listened to, kind of deal. And I think we see that here.
The mages.
They're definitely stubborn, or perhaps just stupid.
Perhaps. Nonetheless, their numbers are no match for my strength and your knowledge of rift magic.
All right, so there Vorwick just kind of solidified the idea that that he has strength, and given to him, that strength would be probably inhuman or more than natural, and he would have gotten that from being naturally gifted with magic. And then Cygnus is the knowledgeable one, which is why I said your knowledge of rift magic, not your ability to control rift or whatever, not your natural rift ability or your natural magic ability, but your knowledge of it. So that's why I think he is the one who's studious of the two. All right, now we get into the 150 years ago, and this is, I think, maybe after that, at some point after what we just watched, this comes up.
Master Cygnus and Vorwik would fight one more battle together before the end.
Why won't you understand, Cygnus? The orcs need a master to shape their single-minded stubbornness into obedience.
Vorwick, old friend, any control would be temporary. See the orcs for what they are. an unstoppable force of nature.
So Vorwick is trying to say that they can be controlled, and Cygnus is saying they can't.
What I see, old friend, is that you refuse to share your power and help me protect the Order.
Now, Vorwick has a good point here, because if all the orcs can be controlled, then they can keep the rifts open using the magical powers and not have to defend, right? Like, wouldn't that be a good idea? You know, like you're trying to defend something against like an incoming invasive force, but if you could control that invasive force and just it doesn't ever invade, then you could still have the thing that they want, and they still not, and then they're not getting it. You know, so that's literally the best idea for all outcomes is to mind control the orcs. You know, but Cygnus is against it. He didn't even want to try. He says, you know, it's not even going to work because they're just an unstoppable force of nature.
If that is truly your goal, look to the defense of this rift. They are coming.
Okay, so that's where we have the lore sometime before Unchained, right? Cygnus and Vorwick have differing opinions, and we know later on that Cygnus banishes Vorwick. Okay, let's actually take a look at that one.
No! He could have helped me! Instead, he banished me!
All right, so Vorwick got banished by Cygnus, and we're going to talk about where he got banished and what happened with that. But first we got to kind of recap a little bit. So Vorwick and Cygnus 150 years ago, which compared to Orcs Must Die 1, he says he's been fighting for the Order for over 300 years. So about 180 years or so before, because you'd assume that Unchained took 10 or 20 years, whatever. You would assume that because that's true, it would have been about 180 years ago from Orcs Must Die 1 is when Vorwick got when they started having their arguments. Who knows how long after that until Unchained that he actually got sentenced to exile, but he did. So that happened before Unchained, and then Unchained starts. Now we don't have any videos for Unchained, but what we do have are a couple of key points here. Okay, we have Gabriella being studious and being explorative and being about 10 years older than Max. Okay. And then we've got Cygnus, who's part of the Order. He's one of the biggest people in the Order. One of the things that Gabriella has found at some point, which this is unrecorded, you could theoretically assume that if it was 1-2 Unchained 3, that the Vergon thing is an Orcs Must Die 1. The problem is she wouldn't have ever told Cygnus because she never talks to Cygnus. So how would she tell him? And he would know. He knows where she went because he created the portal in 2. So how could one happen before Unchained? You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't quite make sense. So anyways, so this would have had to happen before Unchained at some point. So the sorcerer comes to Cygnus at some point and tells him that there's another world called Vergon that the orcs are going to, which is one of the reasons why she knew where to go. Except this is the dead world, and she doesn't end up going to the dead world. She goes somewhere else, as she talks about in her stories. So we know that that's not the case. So she goes to the dead world named Vergon, and that strikes as an inkling in Cygnus's understanding and his suspicion that you can go through rifts to other worlds. So each rift takes you to an alternate reality, right? Or an alternate universe. It's the same planet, but it's alternate universes. You know that because of gravity. The moon's always the same size. You always jump the same height, no matter which portal you go through. Some of these portals are linked to other portals, which link to the orc world. So they go through their portal. They end up on their side. and then you go through the portal and you end up on your side, and then the orcs are spawning from a portal or a rift to go to your rift. Other times it's actually on that plane of existence. For whatever reason, a lot of planes of existence have orcs. It's possible that they could have just been going through different portals and just kind of taking over. And so as you're going through, I call them portals or rifts, as you're going through the alternate universes, you're finding that the orcs are sharing a lot of these alternate universes because they're taking it over. Now, there's something else to note about Cygnus's chapters here. I think they're out of order. One, I think two, they're also written, most of them in post. As in, he didn't write them until after he got back through all of his adventures and everything. But all of this is before Unchained, because he's going to go through, and he already is concerned with Gabriella because he knows that how close she's getting to the truth. And Cygnus is corrupt, and Gabriella is getting to where she doesn't like the order very much. But we'll talk about that a little bit. But I think that he knows that she's getting too close, and so he's worried and raising red flags and gossiping about her that she's could turn evil or whatever the case is. Which evil is just a perspective. So yeah, I think that this Cobalt Blood thing. Okay, listen, we're gonna have to move that somewhere else. But we could, I mean, you could even assume that chapter 1 is actually the latest chapter, because at the end of Unchained, when he could have written this, or he could have written this sometime in Orcs Must Die 1 or 2, he just writes it at some point after a lot of the events of Unchained. He then writes this, and that could be included there. So it might be a continuity thing, you know, this being chapter 1, but it also could be that he wrote it much later. And some of these are the letters that he sent to Max, but most of them are going to be are just going to be an afterthought. So some of the events may not be recalled correctly. One of the cool things that I found when reading all throughout his chapters is he did end up on a sand area. He talks about, let's see, he talks about the walls being painted pictographs and animals. Same very runes we've seen on old order ruins in Eidolon. Eidolon is the human world. Okay. And all of the portals that are in Eidolon are the ones that they're using for magic to bring rain to the crops and such. But this is very important because this is where Cygnus learns how to feign death. And this is another reason why we speculate Unchained happened before 1 or 2, because in 2, when Cygnus reveals himself, Max makes a comment saying that he thought that he was faking his death. And so the only way for him to know that that's possible in 2 is if Cygnus would have told him. But if Cygnus slips on the Cobalt Blood, then go into 1 and 2, and then learns how to feign death in Unchained, then how does Max know that he can do that in 2 if Unchained happens after? It has to happen before, because then Max knows about it. He knows about the ability for Cygnus to do that. And all of this is happening before Unchained, like all of these journal entries and stuff. So anyway, so this is where he talks about he fell over and pretended to be dead until they all left. Okay. Then he finds some the health trinket. This is how we know that some of these are actual letters that he sent to Max. Probably the one where he was in dire need of help. And the Max sends him this. He sends Dobbin and Brass with chapter 13. Tundra probably, or yeah, Tundra somewhere around 14, 15, and 16. This is chapter 18 is where he finds the fortress pairs, which is one of them. It's one of the maps in Unchained. I don't remember, but I think it was going to be for their PvP, 5v5 mode that they had. Yeah, so this is where one rift's on one side and the other rift's on the other side, and it's all surrounded by a mirroring castle, so you could defend both sides. And that's, of course, in that's like, I don't know, paying homage to that game mode, whatever it was called. I don't remember off the top of my head. Okay, so then in chapter 19, he finds Bianca, Queen Mama, and realizes that there is about to be a war with the Unchained and the Order. Okay, so he's going to come home, and the Unchained are upon us. So this is all happening still before Unchained. And he uses Gabriella to do something here. But in order to bolster Eidolon's defenses, he uses that excuse to try and gain more power. And so he creates a ritual, uses Max as a guinea pig, and he wants to create a ritual that that enhances his power or enhances Max's power. We don't know what the ritual is actually supposed to do. But what it does is Max essentially sneezes. I'm assuming Max doesn't know who Gabriella is. She may not even be visible to him during this ritual. Since Gabriella is a studious pupil of Cygnus, she would be familiar with rituals, I would imagine, or at least this one in particular. And Max has no idea what's going on. So Max sneezes, and then Cygnus is able to summon rift shards. Again, something that happens in Orcs Must Die too. But how does it happen if he doesn't know how to do it yet? If he finds out how to summon rift shards, meaning he couldn't summon rifts either, so he had to summon rift shards in order to bring Gabriella back in Orcs Must Die 2. I'm just saying. I don't know. Tell me. I don't know. So obviously Unchained happened before 1. Okay, obviously. Now, this is where Cygnus is at the end of this, at the end of Unchained, after all the events take place. After Unchained, he slips on Kobold's blood. And then he faints, which we'll talk about in Orcs Must Die 1. But first, let's talk about Gabriella. So that's where Cygnus left off. So Cygnus and Vorwik were best friends. They had different viewpoints. Vorwik was probably correct technically. Cygnus didn't believe it would work. They split up. Something happened. Vorwik got banished to the Darklands. And I should also say before we start talking about Gabriella, one of the things that Cygnus did in Orcs Must Die 3 is summon rifts. If you noticed, they were red rifts, and a lot of them that he summoned sporadically were small rifts. But that kind of made me thinking about something. If Vorwick is powerful because he has an inherent, sense of magic, he doesn't actually need like anywhere to pull magic from. He's just magical himself. He doesn't have to use a rift, for example. And he's able to summon massive rifts to bring over hordes and hordes of enemies, as he does throughout the entirety of Orcs Must Die 3. That's where all the orcs come from. Then wouldn't it be something if I told you that even though he was banished, there's still some kind of a link that he had with the areas of Unchained, with the fortresses, to be able to summon the unstable rifts? You see, if he was there, he'd be able to summon major rifts, but he wasn't. He was remote. But because he was remote, and he couldn't really control it very well, he couldn't put a lot of power into it, he had enough power to summon the unstable rifts. Think about that. Okay. Gabriella's time. Now, Gabriella is currently, she is reporting on Thurkvad. Thurkvad is a dwarven settlement that is a rift that they closed some time ago because it's an ancient city, right? That's what they talk about. And she talks about the Great Shift. The Great Shift is an event that basically was climate change. Okay, it led to the desertification of the Western Plains into the Shifted Sands. And the reason it did that is because it took away the magic. You know, you close a rift, you take away the magic at the local area. It's kind of like deforesting a whole zone, and now there's not a lot of oxygen in that area, and or you know, wind can't. I don't know. You reduce a mountain, and now wind can flow through, and then the shoreline becomes deserty, and then because all the wind is moving inwards and pushing all the clouds and all the moisture inwards as well, kind of like that, I guess. So it was it wasn't really a phenomenon necessarily, but it was the closure of a rift that the dwarves did. And they did it on purpose. They did it because of Vorwick. Good stuff, I know. Okay, so she is looking at this great shift, right? And you notice how it turned into the shifted sands. That's very important. And so she wants to write this article and post it for everybody to read. Everybody in Eidolon. Now she's writing this from the outpost north shifted sands. Outpost. Shifted sands. So we have a sand DLC coming up in Orcs Must Die 3, and one of those maps is called Oasis Outpost. But this is just the outpost north shifted sands, unclaimed territory. Aha. But look, read this. She says, I'm in desperate need of your help. I've done something wrong. After she published, the order then reassigned her friend, which is her mentor, to an Oasis expedition. Outpost, Oasis outpost in the shifted sands. That's right. I think we're going back to where Gabriella was at the end of Unchained. This is after Unchained. She already did a ritual with Max. She fought the good fight. Unchained is dying down. They started closing rifts, probably, because they're definitely doing that in 1. That's the goal, is for them to close rifts, because Unchained was such a drastic, like World War I scenario for everybody there. Well, everybody on the rift side, I guess. Not in Eidolon, but yeah, so they can't sustain it because they lost too many lives. They can't sustain all of the rifts. They can't defend all the rifts, so they had to start closing some of the rifts. And so this may be one of them. But anyways, well, we know it's not this one. The one that she's at currently, exploring Thurkvad and the dwarves and understanding the Great Shift. It's all geographically located in the same area. I will say something I did kind of brush over. So the dwarves sealed their world off from the dwarven homeworld, Thur, and to collapse a rift to the dark world. So I think Thurkvad, or Thur, was in between the rift you go through to get to Eidolon. So you go Eidolon to Thurkvad, Thurkvad to the dark world. And they closed the gates of Thurkvad in order to prevent Vorwick from escaping after they banished Vorwick to the Dark World. Okay. We're getting some very flavored text here that's going to help us kind of solidify the idea that Vorwick went to the Dark World. Now, she doesn't like being told what to do, right? So she decides to take it on her own. And she says, I'm going to go to the Dark World to get proof. Okay. Now remember, Cygnus's whole shenanigans was he wanted to control the orcs. Okay. He was born into power hungry mode. That's what he was doing. Gabriella, on the other hand, is in it for the safety and security of her people. Okay. That's what she wants. So they had two different agendas. And Cygnus doesn't want either of those things because he's corrupt and works for a corrupt organization. Now, Gabriella, he tells Gabriella, do not travel to the Dark World. By spying on the Weavers, I've learned the Dark World is without magic. But it has Vorwick, and Vorwick is inherently magic. Much like Ian. But hungers for it. Do we know someone who hungers for magic that is evil, that is powerful? Vorwick, okay? Its terrors will fly to you, and the rift like a moth to a flame. You will hear voices, and you will want power because Vorwick can mind control. Vorwick is just evil. Because slowly the world will drain you and the rift's magic. Now, Gabriella had to get into this place. The only way she could go to the dark world, even though we've seen here that they closed it, that the dwarves closed the portal, which caused the great shift to the dark world. We know that she reopened it because she had to. Otherwise, she's not able to get back in. So she reopened a closed rift, which is kind of more basic magic in as far as like what a war mage can do versus a veteran war mage versus a rift lord. Reopening a closed rift is something that Gabriella can do, but Max cannot. So Max is not quite that level yet. He can close rifts, but not reopen closed rifts. And then he says, and that's why the dwarves of Thurgvad destroyed the rift and the dark worlds. They knew if the rift stayed open, orcs would pour into the world because ours is more magical than Thur. Reconnecting our world to the dark world would be catastrophic. Well, she did that. Okay. And that is where it becomes catastrophic because she turns evil. Now, we don't know how much time elapsed from her opening it and Orcs Must Die 1 happening, but it was a relatively short amount of time. Okay. After this point, Cygnus has slipped on Cobalt's blood and goes unconscious. And now we have Orcs Must Die 1. Okay.
I've spent 300 years fighting for the Order. I've killed thousands of orcs and defended dozens of rifts. And this is how it ends. One slip in a kobold's blood, and my skull cracks open on the gatehouse steps.
All right, so that's the confirmation you need that he's unconscious or whatever. Then he says that it's up to his apprentice, and here we hear something in particular.
Of course, there aren't enough war mages left now.
There aren't enough war mages left, which means Max isn't the only one. Okay. Then he talks about Gabriella, how she's strong, beautiful, and powerful, and whatever. And then this comes up.
The rifts must be closed. It's a simple thing. Step back through and seal all the rifts behind him with a gesture and a thought. A spell even the most dim-witted of us could manage. When the rifts close, the magic dies. Of course, that means no more mind-controlled orcs and ogres. But it also means no more fortresses strengthened by magic. No more summoned rain clouds when the droughts come. No more village spells to help heal the sick.
Now, all right, so now Cygnus is talking about how by closing it, orcs are shut off. And Gabriella loses her powers because Gabriella is studious, not inherently magical. So Gabriella requires the rifts in order to be able to harness the magic. Vorwick does not. So Vorwick can remain inside this desolate territory with all of these enemies and still be in charge because he's inherently magical. Whereas Gabriella has to mind control them with her spells. Now, Gabriella learns how to mind control from Vorwick because that's what Vorwick's whole shtick is. And it's possible that he even mind controlled Gabriella to be in that position. Or he just convinced. He's really good at convincing. He says, listen, I hate the Order. You hate the Order. You know, let's hate the Order together. That could also be the case because Gabriella did not like getting shut down by the Order and did not like the way that the Order was handling the idea behind the incoming threats of other, you know, planes of existence from attacking. And, you know, she also knows that the rift can't be closed because she's one of the people that would harness the power of the rift for the betterment of society. And Cygnus brings up a good point here. He says that, you know, the rains won't fix the crops. Well, you know, ideally, you'd hope that everybody in this governmental agency controlling or running the world of Eidolon would be smart enough to pick a plane of existence or a reality that's survivable without the rifts, right? As I said earlier. And so it's really just a quality of life thing, which leads me to kind of get into a little bit of the speculation part of how like the currency is structured within Eidolon, which would be that people would pay a premium, like a tax, to the Order to protect them from orcs as a side effect of having the rifts open for their convenience, right? But the order needs the threat of invasion to be there in order for the people to pay them taxes or to pay dividends to the order. So the order makes money off of the people that they're A, providing services to, and B, protecting. If they're no longer protecting, then they're no longer going to receive as much money from them, right? And Cygnus has stocks within trap companies, and he gets paid dividends by the order. We know that in Cygnus's lore, which begs to differ. You know, you got to ask yourself the question of, why does Cygnus not want to control the orcs? Is it because he believes that they can't be controlled? You know, or is it because he'll lose money? The order will become less valuable. If all the orcs are just controlled by one person, like Gabriella, for example, and they just go about and just like goof around all day, or they fight each other in Civil War, and then she controls both sides and has them fight each other, and then their numbers dwindle, and then she just kind of manages the rest of them, population control or whatever. And then the order can just sit back and relax, and they don't have to employ war mages. They still can't tax that much, because then the people are going to realize at some point that, hey, they're not recruiting any more war mages. What's going on? We're no longer under the threat of invasion. You know, then we don't need to pay the order as much, because they're not actually providing an additional service. They're not protecting our lives. And so you kind of have to have conflict in order for the order to exist. On top of that, if you're not doing anything with orcs, you're not selling traps. And Cygnus has stock in a trap part company, and so he needs that to exist. So, you know, closing the rifts is a huge detriment to Cygnus. He doesn't want the rifts to close, and he doesn't want the orcs to be mind controlled either. This is a huge deal for him, but right now he's unconscious. He can't do anything about it. His people is closing the rifts. He doesn't know what else to do. He's one of the last ones there, and it makes sense. Orcs bad, closed rift good. Closed rift gets rid of orcs, so therefore closed rift is good. It's very, very logical.
Without magic, the world beyond the rift changes. But our world changes too, and not necessarily for the better. It took courage to make that choice. Courage that only one member of the Order had in the end. Either courage, or a particular brand of stubborn stupidity.
Yeah, and see, here he doesn't even praise Max for closing the rifts, which is another reason, or another way of how you know Cygnus isn't genuine with Max closing the rifts. All right. So we don't know where Cygnus is now. We know that Max knows that he can play dead. We know that he can also summon minor rifts from Unchained, and that he slipped on Cobalt's Blood at the end of Unchained, beginning of 1, which, like I said, happened relatively close together. Now these rifts have been closing, and so you also cut off your supply of help with people in other alternate universes that have been helpful in the past. Now I don't know if these alternate universes and these rifts will work kind of like portals in Minecraft to the Nether, where it would always link up to the same coordinates. And so if you have a rift in a particular location, then the rift to the alternate universe will always go to the same alternate universe, even if you close and reopen it a bunch of times. It's always going to take you to the same place. I don't know. We're going to talk about some theory behind that here in a second.
Was this how it would end? Trapped, surrounded, my power lost. I deserved so much more. They were coming for me. Once I was their queen, now they would be my doom. Then, out of nowhere, new rift? It was different, fragile. I felt a trickle of power returning, barely there. Not enough to mind control even a single orc. Still, the rift offered an escape. As soon as I stepped through, I saw him. Okay,
so she says that it almost as if she recognizes who it is, but realizes that he's not who she would want to see. The rift that she walked through, Max did not pull that up. Okay. She doesn't know who pulled it up. She's like, what the heck happened? He's like, I don't really know. I just closed rifts. But at this point, he's no longer closing rifts. He's just defending them. For whatever reason, I don't know why. He just is defending them now, and we know later on that Cygnus is reopening these rifts. We know that he opened that rift with all of his strength. What I think happened was, assuming that it takes him to her location, that he knew where she was somehow, maybe through some magically scrying eyes or something. He knew her physical location and was able to coordinate if he puts the rift up in his plane of existence in the same place that she is at, then she would teleport through it, is my only guess. That being said, he would have had to have left. Like, he probably would have told Max to get there telepathically. Max doesn't know that. He thinks this is conscious telling him to do it. Or maybe Cygnus can decide where it goes. It's really hard to say. I think what would make sense is that it would have to be in the same location in every single plane of existence, or alternate universes. In every single alternate universe, it would show up in the same exact coordinates, and so the coordinates would always look different because, things in the world would be different. It's very possible. So maybe, but anyways, so Cygnus opens a rift. And assuming that he was geographically in the same location as the rift, he would have had to leave. So he creates the rift and he heals from it. And we know that he heals from the minor rifts that he summons through Unchained, because that was one of the properties, is that it would bring healing power. So he heals, getting his strength back, and runs. He bolts. He doesn't want to see Gabriella. He doesn't even want to, he don't want to see anything. And it's not just Gabriella he's worried about. He's also worried about Vorwick, because remember, Vorwick is on this planet with Gabriella. Now, whether Gabriella was mind controlled by Vorwick, and then once she lost her power, he didn't really care and was like, well, you're not, worth anything to me now anyways, because you can't control any orcs because you don't have any magic. So I'm just going to, leave you in the dirt. It's possible. But it's also possible that Vorwick kind of convinced her, and now that she's going to be back with Max and fighting, she could either be a spy for Vorwick, or working for the Vorwick side of the team, or she could be maybe evil at first and then just kind of warming up to the idea of rejoining the order. That's also a possibility. All right, let's skip ahead to this area here. Cygnus talks about how death started taking over. People started dying because it became mortal, or because of the famine and all that stuff. But again, people can still live on the planet without the rifts, right? He just doesn't make any money. So he doesn't want, he wants to create a solution, but at the same time have a problem that still needs another solution, and then make money in separate avenues. So Cygnus is smart. He's really smart. All right. So in this scene, Gabriella talks about how brand new it is. And then here we have the first time Cygnus comes back to talk to them.
Good. You're finally here.
That voice, is that you, Master?
Wait a minute. You were the old man's apprentice too?
You? You were his last apprentice.
I will explain it all, you have my word. But the orcs are coming. Do what you two do best.
So I think with that dialogue, even though I said earlier that Gabriella knew, or she saw Max, she may not have realized that Max was Cygnus' apprentice. Max could have just been a placeholder for the ritual and not necessarily had any ties with Cygnus. But now she knows. Now she knows.
Sense. The old man planned it all. First he faked his death.
Actually,
there you go, right there. First he faked his death. The only way that Max would know that Cygnus could fake his death is if Cygnus had done it before, and we know that he didn't know to do that, or didn't think to do that, or wasn't able to do that until Unchained. So we know that Unchained happened before. It had to have, as well as the summoning the rift part. If he was able to summon a rift, a minor rift, that takes a lot of skill. That takes a veteran war mage skill, which is like one step below Rift Lord. Rift Lords can summon rifts themselves, and then veteran war mages can summon minor rifts. War mages can reopen rifts, and then apprentices can close rifts. Right? Max is a war mage, but he doesn't know how to reopen close rifts. He just knows how to close rifts, which is the basic stuff. as Cygnus had talked about before. So right there, it tells you that Unchained had to have happened before too. Right? It is not possible otherwise.
I was knocked unconscious and you didn't check on me.
The master was lying there hurt and you just left.
Well, yeah.
Perfectly reasonable. I'd have done the same.
Nice to see.
Ooh. And now Gabriella's coming in with the shade, saying that she would have done the same thing to Cygnus. You know, she doesn't like him. I mean, she doesn't like the order. I don't know if Vorwick would have told her about Cygnus's corruption. Maybe Vorwick didn't know that Cygnus was corrupt. Like, it's very possible that he just hates the order and thinks that Cygnus is like a neutral asset within his hatred towards the order. Because he knows the order is corrupt. He knows that the order requires the orcs to fight, and that the order doesn't want orcs to be mind controlled, because if they are, the order doesn't make a profit, or not as much of a profit, and they start, you know, losing influence in Eidolon, right? So, you know, they've really set themselves into with a foothold within the economy and the structure of Eidolon, and they don't want to lose that. And Cygnus knows that there's that corruption, so he hates the order for it. I don't know if he hates Cygnus or not, and I don't think Cygnus knows, which is one of the reasons I don't think he's shown up again. Like, he wants to avoid Vorwick at all costs.
See you again too, young lady. Keep the orcs at bay. I need more time.
Either.
He does have a point.
Hush. And you know.
Starving orcs eating starving children ain't that great either.
He does.
Yeah, so here they compare reopening the rifts and not reopening the rifts. And, you know, Max is bringing up the idea that it's not better to have orcs invade versus having the rifts closed and surviving with the rifts closed. But again, Cygnus dismisses that idea. And Gabriella's like, you know what? See, that's a good idea. We should just keep the rifts closed. I'm back over, close all the rifts, and we're good. But Cygnus can't have that. He needs the orcs to attack, and he needs the portals to be open in order for him to make any kind of currency.
Construct fortresses, but the orc mob will be drawn to any new rifts.
And here he says he's going to open more rifts and construct the fortresses through the magic of the rifts. So he's a very powerful wizard. He's able, or wizard, war mage. He's able to use magic from the rifts to create these structures, which is where we find them from. Not the best architect in the world. You know, I would definitely fortify it quite a bit more and not have multiple entrances and, I don't know, a lot of other things, more hazards, I guess. But you know, I don't make them. All right, let's go to the next cutscene.
Master, you were better than the rest of the order.
You're wrong. I failed both of my apprentices.
Gabriella just told the master that he's better than the rest of the order. She did rely on him for some support, but he says you're wrong. And then I think the next part that he says is separate from him being wrong, or from her being wrong about him being better. He knows that he's not, because he is corrupt in the corrupt organization. But she doesn't know that, probably. So then he talks about how he trained Max.
Best.
You were. Except in the end, he was better.
What you say is true. I may have made poor choices.
Those choices are the past. Make different choices now.
Hey, did you hear the part where...
Keep this last rift safe.
Let the numberless horde come. They feared me once, even as they served me. I will make them fear me again.
Rift? Check. Orcs? Check. Keep one thing out of the other? Double check. Let's do this.
All right, so that's basically the end of Orcs Must Die 2. So that's kind of the end of all the lore, except for one other thing, is when Cygnus does not show up to fight Vorwick. Now this is why I believe Cygnus was missing this entire time. He was missing in 1, in 2, and 3. Is because he knew as soon as he reopened the portal to the Dark World to bring Gabriella back, he opened the door for Vorwick. And he had to flee. He had to run. Because Vorwick is looking for him. And he was probably going out throughout all of 2 and just kind of moving around in the shadows and looking for Cygnus. I mean, there's no other reason for it. He probably didn't even care to summon rifts because at that point he didn't care to summon minor rifts or major rifts. He just wanted to find Cygnus.
Where are you, Cygnus? Why did you send these children? Face me!
He seems nice.
And that's it. That's all we have. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of other things here, a couple of other ideas. If we go to the Steam DB info page for Orcs Must Die 3, and then we go into achievements. No, not achievements, community. Yeah, we have these badges. Now, this is kind of a stretch, but look at this. We have Apprentice for Egan, War Mage for Kelsey. Okay, remember what I said. Apprentices can close rifts. War Mages can reopen rifts. Veteran War Mages can summon minor rifts. Or no, Veteran War Mages can do mind control, and they can pull power from rifts. Master War Mages can summon minor rifts. And Rift Lords can summon major rifts. We know this because look at what their faces. We have a younger Cygnus, which I guess he looks older in Orcs Must Die 1 and 2. And Unchained, but still, you can go with me here. You know, he can summon minor rifts. And then the evil Vorwick can summon major rifts. But before he became evil, he couldn't, right? He needed some of the power that Cygnus had, but he couldn't. But now he can because he's learned how to do it. His magical abilities have grown over time. But then we have something very peculiar here with Max being listed as an overlord. You see, that's strange in the fact that that is the highest ranking official in the badges. Okay. And here's something else that's pretty strange about all of this is at the very end here, when you beat it and Egan and Kelsey are walking together.
This day, they became war mages.
You see that? Here, let me go back.
This day, they became war mages.
That was Max. But that wasn't just Max. That was Max coming out of a red rift that only one person can summon. Vorwick. What initiative would Vorwick have to bring Max back is the question. Why would he do it? And I think that's because either Max is A, dumb like an orc and can be mind controlled, or B, dumber than an orc and cannot be mind controlled. Or, you know, and maybe he just got like tired of having Max around because Max wasn't any good to him. He's trying to find Cygnus. So he probably had Max and was asking Max, you know, where's Cygnus and stuff. And Max is over there like, who's that? You know, could be. And he's like, well, you're not worth my time. I won't spend any more of my energy on you, and just released him back. But that would be kind of a detriment to what Vorwick is trying to do. Although not necessarily. I don't think he's necessarily trying to invade anymore. He's just trying to get his revenge back on Cygnus for banishing him in the first place. Yeah, it just kind of makes you wonder that maybe it could be also that Max is just smarter than everybody else. He's playing dumb because he's in charge. He's running the whole show. Cygnus is a war mage of the order, but maybe Max is the overlord of the order and all the rifts. Maybe everything. I don't know. Okay, so that is one of those things to talk about. And like I said, the other thing we can speculate is that Gabriella could still be on the bad side. One of the reasons why Cygnus could be hiding is because he still doesn't trust Gabriella, even 20 years after. He still doesn't trust her. It could be that she was sent back to play along, or she decided to play along until she found Cygnus and then captured him for Vorwick. That could also be the case. It could be, like I said earlier, that she's mind controlled. Okay. She's smart enough to be mind controlled, probably unlike Max, who probably can't get mind controlled because he's just not smart enough. But she has powers somewhat, and whenever she entered the dark world, she had power, and she mind controlled orcs. And so I think it's more likely that she just learned from Vorwick on how to do that, since that's Vorwick's primary mission when he went bonkers, I guess, is to control the orcs. So he probably developed some sort of skill set for that, went to the Dark World, honed his skills, summoned minor rifts in Unchained. And then when Gabriella showed up, he was like, oh, I don't need to waste my energy on summoning magic rifts. You can go invade for me. And so then convinced her to invade. She did. Portals closed, and he said, oh, crap. And then they reopened, and now it's his time to slip back into the world to look around and try to find Cygnus. And Gabriella could be evil still, could be not. I'll let you guys figure that one out. And remember, one of the coolest things I found with this is this sand, all the sand references that have come up. That Cygnus found a sandy area, one of the portals that took him to a world that had sand in it. And we don't know what he found there necessarily, other than he gained the ability to fake his death. And then Gabriella, being in the, it's just too coincidental that we're gonna have an Oasis Outpost map, and she was in an Oasis Outpost in her lore. It's just too coincidental. I'm thinking that the new war scenario might take place in that, because that's going to be geographically close to where Cygnus got banished. She was studying the Great Shift, which is when the dwarves of Thurikvad closed the gates, which is the link to the Dark World where Vorwick was banished. And it's geographically close. We know that because the Order banished or blacklisted her mentor and sent her to the Oasis Outpost, or to the Oasis within the desert region that she was at studying the Great Shift. So geographically it would have been close, and I think that's might be what we see. It could be nothing related to that. There could be no story on that. I don't know. But yeah, so anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. It was pretty fun to think about, and I may or may not have dreamed about it. My girlfriend said I woke up in the middle of the night and said something about orcs, and then went back to sleep. I definitely wouldn't remember that, because that happened as I was probably dreaming about it, I guess. I don't know. It's a little bit weird, but anyways, yeah. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, follow, stream both YouTube and Twitch, and I'll see you on the flip side. Deuces.